Okay, so as you said, this right here is statistical significance. It's way below 0.05. So the overall model is statistically significant. To get the statistical significance of individual variables, we'd look right here. Probably should do a Bonferroni correction since there's 4 variables in there. So I've divided 0.05 by 4. So we're really, for statistical significance of the individual variables, we're looking to get below this cutoff right here. And the ones I've highlighted in green indeed have that. Now, just because drugs wasn't statistically significant on its own, sometimes people will run the model without it then, or sometimes a variable that isn't necessarily predictive on its own as part of the overall package can serve a role, and so it's often just as common to leave it in there anyway. Looking here, we see that the practical significance was fairly low, and part of that is because the variables that were used as predictors were all they were all like 2-category variables, and that's totally fine. It's a legitimate regression. What that means is there's probably more powerful tests that might show a bigger effect size. Not that the regression itself is wrong, but it's kind of the weak scenario. It's very possible that the true relationship is even more. We could look at in weeks later on. There's chi-squared statistics, and those deal with categorical variables a little more powerfully. So here, I want to go over these numbers right here. So the standard error, that does give you a sense of how much these vary, but they're not really the ones to interpret. These are the ones that have a very clear interpretation other than the intercept. So what does this 1.45 mean? It means as you go up 1 unit on this variable, and in this case I believe that's going from male to female. I believe male was 1, female was 2. So as you go from male to female, you're getting a predicted 1.4 more days of poor mental health per month. A simple way of saying that is all else being equal on these 3, so 2 children that had equal values for these 3 situations, but one's a male, one's a female. On average, the females would have 1.4 more days of poor mental health per month. So we're seeing, for whatever, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things you could go into there, and why are the females in general experiencing this more poor mental health, more days of poor mental health. But that's what this result is telling us. In this one right here, again, as we move up 1 value on this variable, we're expecting the average number of days of poor mental health to change by this amount. So let me pull up, here's the survey, and of course we've taken out the 7s and 9s. So as we move up 1 unit on this variable, in other words, as you go from a yes answer, so a student who lived with someone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, to a no answer, we're moving from a 1 to a 2. As that would happen, we would have negative 1.86 predicted on average more days of poor mental health. Simply put, that's saying that as you go from a situation where there was a problem drinker in the house, to one where there wasn't, your predicted number of days of poor mental health is going to decrease by almost 2 days. So by not having a problem drinker in the house, we predict on average in the state of Pennsylvania, you'd have 2 fewer days of poor mental health per month. Similar here, it wasn't a statistically significant result, but it's still part of the predictive model that basically by going from a situation where there were drugs in the household to one where there were not, we would take off one of those days of predicted poor mental health per month. So the people who, as a child, had drugs in the house, they're on average, all else being average, they're going to have an additional one day of poor mental health than those who didn't have drugs. And this one's a pretty extreme one. You can see here how that compares to these two right here. So by having a family member who went to prison, that's on average going to 3.5 extra days of poor mental health per month. That's a pretty nasty one. And when you combine them, I mean, these would add together. So this would be, well, let me just run through a quick prediction here. So let's say you were a female who had all of these three situations. So this would be this plus 2 for female times this plus, and we're saying someone does have drinking, plus someone does have drugs, plus this person did have someone go to prison. On average, we'd expect a little over half the month for them to have poor mental health. On the other hand, let's say that we still had a female, but this female did not have any of those adverse childhood experiences. We would expect fewer than 10 days of poor mental health on average per month. So, I mean, that's about a week difference, these three all combined. And of course, if we made this a male here, so this would be a value of 1 on the sex variable, it'd be even lower in terms of predicted. This is the average. The standard error tells us a little bit about how precise this is, and that's where the lower R-squared tells us that it's pretty hard to predict for a specific person. However, this is a true number on average. If you took all the people in Pennsylvania, all the adults in Pennsylvania, and put in their values on these variables, I mean, it would be true that males without any of these adverse childhood experiences, the average of those would probably be somewhere around 8.5 days of poor mental health. If we took the female, well, let's just take a male who did have all three of those in their childhood. That male, on average, of all the males in Pennsylvania who did have all three of these things going on in their household as a child, again, a little over half a month, about half of the days, they would be poor mental health, according to the self-report. I mean, there is that self-report aspect. I think they've gotten it down fairly accurate, and they've tested that reliability in a few different ways. So I'd say it's fairly reliable, but there is some issues there with that self-report aspect of the variable. So that's what these mean here. And one more thing to add there, I can't remember if you had this or not, but these confidence intervals give where we think the true average actually is. So it may not be 3.5 days extra of poor mental health that you would expect having a family member go to prison, but we're pretty sure it's somewhere between 2 and 5 days. So even best case scenario, if you as a child had a family member go to prison, I mean, on average you're looking at best case scenario 2 up to 5 days of extra poor mental health on top of anything else life may throw you. So yeah, fairly sobering, fairly interesting, useful results here.